we've had some time to write some more questions down, so now we're going to, we have some prepared questions that we want to ask the panelists on, and then they can just kind of ping pong however they decide, whoever it applies to. It might not, the question might not apply to every single person down the row here, so we'll just go ahead and get started on that. Then we're going to take the questions from the audience. So the first one I would like to ask, how does your work benefit students? So anyone can talk to that? Tell us about your classroom experience. Should I start? We're going to rock, paper, scissors. Okay. I can tell you. Yes, that's okay.
I'll start. So, I absolutely love my job. I have a wonderful job. And, I think now going into year 3, I'm really starting to see the benefits. And so some of this data I already shared with you is huge. I mean, just the internships alone, that 38% growth in 2 years, we're so proud of. I think another thing is we're luckily, our grad rates are a little bit higher. We're at about 80.2% in our grad rates in Hillsborough. But I think part of it is that we continue to make sure that are aware, eligible, prepared. That's what we follow in our school district of how do we make sure that we're continuing to support our students through that journey. I think we've also really recognized that it's not just the school district, but our community that we really need that support from, and how do we continue to reach out to our community when we know 30% of Hillsborough has students in our school district and 70% does not. So that community outreach and support is very valuable to us. And making sure that we can have those internship opportunities and those hands-on learning experiences for our students. So, I think that like running the camp this summer was a great opportunity for not only our high school students to be able to be teaching middle school and high school students, but in turn also for our younger students to be being exposed to these pathways at a younger age so that they can start to explore, is something in the world of STEAM interesting to me? Or do I want to explore business and management? I think that the benefits that we're starting to see, especially at that younger age, is really starting to pay off, not only in our grad rates, but also some of those post-secondary enrollment data rates I shared with you guys as well. So I also, just the individual narratives that you hear from students of having that experience is so inspiring. Something also I think that we focus on is how can we make sure that we retain our students. It'd be great for them to have a career in Hillsborough. It'd be great for them to go off to 2 or 4 year school but come back, because we know that our community is growing. We know that the growth in industry is huge. So we're also trying to create pathways that are relatable to our local community to make sure that we retain our students as well. So currently we're looking at developing a biomedical tech program, for example, at one of our high schools. We know that that is a growing pathway. We are also exploring growing. We're so lucky. We got over $600,000 in career technical education grants last year. So we know that manufacturing and engineering is huge. How do we continue to make sure our students are career ready, have those experiences, have the right equipment in their classrooms to be able to go right into those careers? So I think we're seeing those benefits just within the data, and I'm very proud of that. I also get really out of air because of this little person that's growing, so you gotta take a breath now. I'm gonna pass it on to baby Josh.
So how does your work benefit students? So watching Joe talk, and he spoke to one of our classes a couple years ago, and he shared a story that I think is really fitting, and it kind of speaks to what we do in Future Connect. And Joe told a story where he graduated from high school, got into PSU, and he went to PSU, first class, and the door was closed. Okay, the door was closed at the classroom. That wasn't his experience in high school. And so he turned around and he left and he enlisted in the Army. So he was on campus. He was on a university campus. This is true, right?
Yeah.
I remember the day you told this to our students. We have a class that our first generation students take. And he tells the story, and it was the figurative and the real of what that must feel like to an individual who often is the first one in a family to go to college, that door is not open. And that just that simple barrier could then lead someone down a different path for 6 years, enlist, and then come back. And then you applied to PCC and you started then, right?
Yeah.
So for our students to hear that story from someone like Representative Gallegos, excuse me, and also to have that experience where many of them, when we meet them in their senior year, they feel like it's not an option, that those doors are closed. I think what we do is we help some of those systems communicate to one another. And so that's a big piece of what I see every day, which is systems, whether it's cities or K through 12 systems or OUS systems that aren't necessarily, think they're preparing students or they think they're doing a great job of getting students in, but they're not really working with the individual student. And so we open doors for students who are thinking they don't otherwise belong there. And I see it every day. It's hard work. And I think a lot of what we do is we change that community. And that's the other piece, I think, where we benefit students is once we are able to work alongside students, and let me be honest, I'm not doing the work, the students are doing the work. We're just helping to articulate the system, right? Once they bring that back home, their parents and their siblings see how that is, then we all of a sudden change a whole community of learners. It's not just that person who's in our class now, but it's all those individuals back home. So that's where I really value the work that I do and how it benefits students. Thanks for that story, Joe, by the way.
You're welcome. I made it up.
Don't tell me that.
I think at the elementary level, most elementary teachers, I would say, we were probably the groundwork for all that they are doing at their levels. And I think how we benefit students is we take those little guys that are first generation students whose parents might not speak English or speak a different language or even struggle socially, economically. We are the first to see the traumas that take place and how to get students connected with help that they need. It starts early. It starts with those relationships when they first come through the doors. We're also the ones probably that really get families involved in schools. If a parent has had a bad experience in their education, they will probably be the first people that when they bring their little one to school, they're terrified. They're terrified of the teachers, they're terrified of the other parents. They just have a bad taste in their mouth about what education is and what we're here to do. So I think at the elementary level, we're also those ones that are, welcoming. We want you to be in our rooms. We have open door policies. I can't tell you how many times I've looked up and there are like people in my room that I have no idea are in there, but they're in there for the first time because they feel comfortable coming in and having a conversation with me about their child. And I think that helps those students. The more support they have, not just at school, but with their families, and then the community input that we have, these partnerships that we've made through STEAM and STEM and Right Brain and those sorts of things where we get students and their families excited about education. Then when they get to middle school and high school, they do see that path because you have helped kind of guide them and say, you can do this. We're like the cheerleaders. I think that's what the elementary, we're good at being the cheerleader. We're the ones that really want to see everybody succeed. Not that they don't, they're very specialized in what they do, but we are the first ones to see everybody. And I think that's what we do at my grade level, my area of expertise.
I've seen her in action. I've been in her classroom when they've been studying and singing the song of the respiratory system. You learn all about things, and I'm telling you, every student was up on their feet. Every student was in an engaged learning environment, and their parents were lined up in that classroom too. So it's a lot. It's a lot to take in when she has 36 students in her classroom on an everyday challenge. She's an amazing teacher.
But I have to add to that little caveat, is Janine is in there with us. Like, she knows what's taking place in our classroom. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to plug that, but I'm gonna plug it anyway, because we, outside of education, if you have not been in our classrooms in the past 10 years, be there. She's there. It is very different than it was, I won't tell you how old I am, but a long time ago, even when I first started teaching 22 years ago, the way I teach is very different now than it was then. So I appreciate that we have people like Joe and Janine that come in and really know what's happening in our classrooms, take a vested interest in what we're doing. So.
Okay, my turn. The question I've got in front of me here is, at what age should government public schools begin engaging in a child's education ideally? So, I don't know, we all need to answer, but yeah.
I'm gonna start
All
that
right.
because it's pre-K, it's the Head Start kids, it's the, you know, the YMCA that has kids in the summer. It starts as early as we can
Get your
get those
hands
little
on it.
ducks into our program. That's what we want. We want them excited, we want them engaged, we want the families to be engaged and excited, so
Yeah.
age 0.
And I would say it literally prenatal,
Yeah.
because when sometimes kids are not diagnosed with things until they're 3 or 4, or 2 or 3, and sometimes there were interventions that could be done a lot earlier. So, you know, pre-K, and I mean, if I had a magic wand, every school would have, every child would have a Head Start. And the reason is that the Head Start program has a parent component. And so you're not only working with the kids, but you're also working with the parents. So it's in it, we almost need it from birth up to the time they walk in.
Cradle to career, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
Josh? you want-
Yeah, no, I think that's important. I think that the education that we see with young parents, and I just use the term cradle to career because we think that's important. We have a lot of teen
Yeah.
parents, so.
Yeah. Well, no, and you know, you've heard from the people that are there in the trenches. I just want to plug one of the bills that I'm working on now to return social workers to the schools systems. And I don't know how many of you have been, you're a pretty young group. You might not remember in the 80s, they did away with school social workers, basically declassified them. And so I'm trying to do a bill that would get them back into the schools. And Margaret and I were just talking about how maybe the place to focus that particular intervention is in K through 3rd grade. And along those lines, I'll just mention that in doing the trauma-informed care bill and thinking about the social work bill, I read a book that was actually suggested by Peter Buckley, the rep from Ashland. And the book is called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And it is a heartbreaking book. It is by a psychiatrist who dealt with traumatized children. You know, all kinds of situations in which he dealt with, and these are very young children. And it really does bring home this whole concept of trauma-informed care and how trauma at such a young age, you know, kindergarten, 3 years old to 6 years old, whatever, it wires your brain. It wires your brain. It really, you get hardwired into your stress reaction to how you're going to deal with stress. Even as senior adults, we're still operating with those kinds of trauma. So again, I think that if we think about where we should focus our energies, certainly that early childhood intervention is an area. Do you have another question?
Well, one of the questions that we wanted to ask for students that was down here, it wasn't from the audience, it was, so were there obstacles that you faced receiving adequate support for your education? Were there any obstacles?
I would say yes. I mean, coming from like another country, it is a lot different when you come and you don't know the language very well and stuff. So people wouldn't really pay attention. So you grow up with the mindset, I guess, of just passing school, not really thinking about the future. So for me, when I started getting to know the teachers and really getting close to them, then I started to do it out of my own time. My parents didn't help a lot, and then not a lot of like the teachers would help. But once I started like to talk to them about stuff, then I guess like the obstacles started to like decrease. And then in high school, I started to like look for outside sources so then I can keep going to my education instead of just thinking and staying stuck in the mindset of, oh, I just need to pass school and that's it, not thinking about the future a lot. So yeah, now it's a lot better for high school students, I think. Well, not really, but it changed a lot, I think. Because, I mean, students still think that you just need to go to school, pass the class, and that's it, and they don't really think about the future. But now it's a lot about just passing the grades, and that's it, and just graduating, and they don't know what's out there, just because they don't really show us what's out there, and yeah.
I think another thing too is that there are a lot of classes that I know that my high school friends and stuff like that, they have to take, and they have no idea what they're doing, or they want to take classes that are specialized, but we don't have enough money or funding for that in our classes, and so they're stuck doing things in classes. Like I had a friend who was really into, I forgot what he's into, but he was in art for some reason, taking an applied arts class, and he did nothing in that class because he had no interest in it. And teachers always called him troublemaker, but he really just didn't like it. And he'd be absent all the time, and all he cared about was just passing the class. He didn't care about anything else. And then he got to the point where he's like, I don't really want to go to college anymore. I don't want to do anything with my life because it just seems like I'm being forced to do something I don't want to do. And I know personally I never had to do with that because I always had a plan with my life, but I know a lot of people struggle with that. And so it's one thing that's troubling.
Great. My turn again?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a good one. But I wanted to comment on Karen's comment about language and share another story with you. That when I think it was 6th grade, I was going to St. Philip Neri in southeast Portland, and when I was there, it was predominantly Italian neighborhood, right? So as I was in the playground, everybody come up and spoke Italian to me, and I tried to explain, no, I'm not Italian. And I finally got so tired of it, I learned to speak Italian. Yeah. All right, this question here. What programs are you doing for kids with developmental disabilities? Yeah. Who's going to grab that one?
Well, at our school, we are a STEAM school. I think we're one of the first in the nation. We actually got recognized and went to the White House last year. They've spent time studying our school quite extensively on why we are successful, not just with your middle of the road students that have support at home and whatnot, but our second language students, our SPED students, our behavior students. What we do in our classroom engages students at all levels. So I think that's one way that we are working to meet the needs of disabled students or challenged students. Because in reality, everybody's challenged, right? You just have to pick which one you're challenged at. So engaging students at all levels. Janine said that in my classroom, we're using music. We know that the brain functions very well in memorization with music and rhythms and beats. We use art to teach geometry, social sciences, engineering. We use all,
And respiratory system.
and the respiratory system. My students made designs, actual working models of the way that their lungs worked. But every student in my classroom, whether they were on an IEP, and I had a student that was functioning, here we are, 4th grade, they were functioning at a 1st grade level. They could sing the songs, they could reiterate everything that we had learned. They built their model by themselves. They understood what was taking place. It's making education very hands-on and relevant to them. You said some students didn't quite have a path, they didn't know what they wanted to do, and I think if we continue to teach in little boxes and we don't make those out of the classroom connections, students are like, well, why am I doing this? We need to change that so that they can see, I'm learning this so that I can understand this. And not just within the 4 walls of our classrooms and our schools, but in our community. My students know that the lungs are very important, and they know the pollution caused by X, Y, and Z affects their lungs. I mean, it's teaching so that they're making those connections. So I think, at least at our school, that's how we're addressing that, along with working with our inclusion teachers, our specialists that come in and help us make things happen and when we aren't reaching them, because I'm a jack of a lot of things, a jack of all trades in my classroom. I know a lot of information, but I can't know it all. And so we have to have those specialists that we can use as soundboards or that have more tools in their tool belt than I have. And so I think having a good relationship with your special education team and whatnot is important.
Thank you.
I'll speak a little bit about on the secondary end, and good thing I'm married to a Hillsborough School District special education administrator, because I can fold in some of that right now. I think, in the high school realm, there are career classes that are specific for students who are in special education programs. So when we talk about special education, there's such a wide range, but some of the things that came to mind were the classes that students have. We also have resume and interview workshops for students who are in special education programs. So they go to the Northwest Regional ESD and they practice their career readiness skills. They get feedback based on for their resumes and their interviews. Also, we serve students up to age 20. So when students, if they do continue on from that 18 to 20-year-old program, they really do start to focus on those career skills, some things that they're starting to do which are exciting. There's an entrepreneurial business that they're starting, so you might see this at the Tuesday market next summer. They're starting a doggy biscuit business, just teaching them those skills of having an idea and putting that into action, and then the marketing and the skill set of selling those. We have Tuesday Teen Market, so if you go to our Tuesday Market, that's something that we've created within our College and Career Pathways program, where any student who is interested in young entrepreneurship can apply to sell products at our market, and that's another way that our students within special education up to age 20 are getting those opportunities and those career experiences.
Okay, thank you. Janine?
We will ask because we have so many questions here. I was trying to think, some of these have been answered regarding trauma-informed care. Although you could probably speak a bit more about, will there be such a person in each school? Is there a mandatory reporter?
Well, what the plan is the idea that, and it's a big ticket item, because what you're doing is you're adding staff. And we're still 4,000 teachers down from where we were about 8 years ago. So that's why you have 36 kids in an 8th grade class, or in a 4th grade class, at 42 in an 8th grade class. But ideally what it would be to have a trained, whether it be probably a social worker, whether it be a social worker, a child psychologist, a healthcare professional that's been trained in trauma, that kind of thing, in every single elementary and middle school in the state of Oregon. That's ideally what we used to have. And then on the high school level, it might be a little different, maybe more counselors that actually counseling kids, or more mental health specialists. And so that ideally, that's what it is. But I think what I would like to see is where you've got the funding with, right now we've got a program where we wanted $5 million for the pilot, we got $500,000. And so we have it like in 4 or 5 schools. And the training's already done. It's the idea of placing. But what I would like to see is up to the school district as to where they see where the need is. So even on a district basis, this school may need to have more trauma, or this school may need to have more social worker kind of, homeless and food and, those kind of trauma, as opposed to maybe more psychology kind of thing. So that is what the idea is, but again, it's coming up with the funding to be able to do this, because we cannot have unfunded mandates to tell school districts, you have to have a social worker in every building, but there's no money behind it. You can't do that.
Can I share just a little, because I just want to share how important this is specific to our school district. We just in 1 year's data increase, that we saw a 13% increase just in suicide assessments that our school counselors and our care coordinators were doing in 1 year, just last year. So that's huge. We're so lucky that all of those assessments, that kids came and they did those assessments with us, but 13% increase in 1 year is huge. We also are seeing a huge increase in K-1-2 in trauma-informed care, and students are coming in with adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, what's connected to trauma-informed care. So that has been a huge increase too in our schools in those elementaries. So what they're speaking about is so important. And, our ratio in Hillsborough for school counselor to students is about 400 to 1. So 400 students to 1, which in some districts though, they don't have school counselors in every building. They maybe don't have them in elementary. I mean, it's interesting when you look at the world of school counseling. But when we know that a school counselor is doing personal social work, the career and college readiness, and the academic support, it's so important to be able to have one, school counselors in each building, but two, to be able to have a ratio that is gonna best serve each student. The national recommendation is 250 to 1. So, what they're speaking about really does impact wherever community you live in. There needs to be an increase in that support, and we really are seeing the need for that with our students.
What I'm hearing from teachers real briefly is that behavioral issues are becoming more and more and more prevalent, and they don't have, you have to take away from the kids that you're teaching to deal with that behavior problem.
It's the internet. Seriously, I don't need to make fun of it. It is a serious problem. And I want to also sort of acknowledge that we've got like, 25 minutes or so left, so we want to make sure we get through these questions and see if there's any more out there, and then let you go on time. But for full disclosure, I don't want to also acknowledge that I am Latino, and I am an educator, and I am a social worker. So all of these things are really important to me.
Who speaks Italian?
Who speaks a little bit of Italian. Thank you, Joe, for telling us about our Latino community. They face additional barriers. How can we ensure that they have the support they need to graduate? So it's a general question about support for Latinos, and maybe just one or two you might want to respond to something like that. That question?
Well, I think one thing is opportunity early on. We know that when students know that they have access to opportunity, they're going to respond. So many of the students we bump into in high schools don't think about that opportunity until it's too late, and so then the systems that are in place have multiple steps. By the time they want to start those steps, they're behind, and then they feel like they don't belong, and then they don't go, and then they choose something else. And so for us, I mean, I think some of the movement that Oregon has made in regard to Oregon Promise is exciting. We have an additional step of the ORSA this year, which has provided for more Oregon dollars to go towards students who are not Pell eligible. And additional, the Oregon Opportunity Grant is another grant that's now available to individuals who are not Pell eligible. So that's a big change that's happened, and I think Oregon is on the forefront of leading that push. Scholarship opportunities are few and far between, but it's always good to also have an individual out there in the community that represents that community speaking about their experience. So there's nothing like that. It's one thing for me to go out and say how great college is, but it doesn't mean the same thing unless we have someone who represents that community and can speak to their own experience that's relevant culturally to what it's like to try and navigate those two systems. So I think it's really important to recognize the money piece, and also that there are leaders out there in our communities that can speak to that real life experience.
Something that we've been looking at too, and we have a partnership on, is how do we make sure that we have culturally and linguistically diverse educators in our schools? I think that is so important for our students to make sure that they see educators that look like them. So we've started a partnership with Western Oregon where we work with students who are interested in becoming educators during their high school years, and then they go to Western Oregon to become teachers, and then to come back in our school districts to serve in our schools. I think that that's huge from K-12 for our students to be able to see that. What's really difficult in our state right now is that every school district knows that and believes that, and so to grow your own is really the model of what we need to do, and that is not only for our teachers, but for our administrators, for our district office people, to make sure that we reflect the students that we serve. We serve a 51% minority population within Hillsborough, and so for us to be predominantly a white educator staff right now is something that we just need to continue to make sure that we're changing it and mindful of.
Okay, can we get that next one?
Yes, 6 minutes here. So, there's two of these are very similar, the ones that we kind of had questions for. I want to tie in any student's voice here, make sure. How do you see changes that could be made to increase graduation rates? What do you think can be, what do you see with your peers and folks? This is somewhat here talking about increasing funding, or what do you see with your?
Guys,
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so what more do you think we can be doing to increase graduation rates of folks, of
Okay.
students?
Well, I think it's about pulling the students, like they were saying about when they're young at age, especially when I have like younger siblings and they love to do things and they love to be out there, but they just need to see that they can do it. And so I think by showing them that they can do it, then that's a big thing for them. And I guess it's not only financially, but it's also having the community help them, like just little kids, because they're the next generation. And I mean, if we teach them that it's not like that life is easy, a little bit, that they can do a lot of things, and showing them since they're young kids, showing them that they can do things and not just, just educationally, but, you know, like showing them that there's a bigger world than just their little community. Because a lot of like what happens with like the minor or the small communities is that the communities themselves shut the kids down just by telling them other things and just by shutting them down, I guess. But I guess if we, as teachers, or I'm not a teacher, but as you guys teachers, just letting the kids know that there's other communities as well and not just their own, so they can expand, I guess. So.
Another thing too is having adults who are part of other communities be like a leadership figure for them, because I remember Hill High's principal freshman, sophomore year, saw him every single day outside, morning, afternoon, say hi, they'd interact, the VPs would interact with the kids. He was Latino, he was bilingual, he connected to all of our student body and everybody really enjoyed it. And now that we've had a change in admin, I don't see anybody anymore. It's very, you do your own thing, you go to class and then you go home. Like it's not open, and I know a lot of kids feel like they're kind of stuck because nobody wants to reach out to them, and as a teenager it's really hard to say what you want a lot of times and ask for that help. So.
I mean, it's interesting that you're hearing this from the student perspective, because we just recently had this at our district kickoff, our all-staff district kickoff. That was the message. The message was about the relationships that students have with staff and with community members, and what a difference that makes in their education experience. It was the whole message, and it was inspiring. We had our superintendent speaking. We had students speaking to that perspective. We had a video message that I think you can actually find on the website for the Hillsborough School District, if not coming soon, that spoke of that message. So it's great to hear it from you.
Okay, I have a final question here, and it's actually for Janine. However, let me read the question first. You say you want to improve government transparency. Do you have any experience improving transparency for the public? I just want, before I ask Janine to respond to that, I just want to comment on the fact that in Salem, I am on the committee, the State Transparency Committee, and we meet once a year in Salem. And there is a website, literally, there is a website. It's called the Oregon Government Transparency website. And you can go to that website and really, it's interesting because, I mean, you really got to be wonky to do this stuff. I mean, but if you're really concerned, you can go there and see where, like the corporation's taxes and where the money's going and who's paying how much in taxes and so on. Or other kinds of things. You can look at salaries for administrators, all kinds of things like that. But it is the state's effort to be more transparent. And so that's something that is relatively new, I think, in the last 4, 5, 6 years. So again, transparency is something that the state is trying to address. But Janine?
And I want to make sure that somehow we get these, this short on time. I appreciate everybody's passion for being here. But I do want to tell you that some of these questions, it does, we talked about absenteeism, we talked about graduation rates, and so I appreciate those questions. But I would probably say, as a school board member, 8 years I've been on the school board. I've been board chair for 2 of those years. And I would say that some of my work on transparency, and I've often said open and transparent governmental process is important. You want people to believe in the system. People want to know the money, the hard-working, the money that they invest in that system is well spent. They want to know where it's going. So I think it's something as saying, in our budget process, making sure that our budget process is very inclusive within the community. It's not just staff members, it's not just administrators, we have community members that take part in that. We have making sure it's exciting because at our last meeting, we actually had administrators talking about really putting together some real visuals for folks to show them exactly, where those dollars are being spent. I also think that, and my record would probably speak to, talking about making sure you have open and transparent meetings when you have amongst public officials. You need to make sure that your meetings are conducted in public and are there as a representative. There are very few topics that you can discuss in like an executive session, but making sure that we have those meetings are very, that are public and decisions are made in public. We are there as representatives of the public. So that's, that would probably be examples that I would think as transparency.
So I think we can go into taking questions from the audience, I think.
Well, that's what these have been, yeah. And I just did hear that I think we had a combination of but I just did hear they did the 10-minute warning. Boy, at 8 o'clock, if you haven't been to the library in a long time, 8 o'clock they say, thank you for coming.
They nicely say, go home.
Yeah. Like I said, we did touch on these subjects, but I do want to is there any final thoughts from panelists that you really want to speak to, or?
Well, I will.
Okay.
Because I guess I'm really passionate about this. The last question that you asked, what do you think we can do more to increase our state's graduation rate?
Mm-hmm.
And Janine's right. The Hillsborough School District, our kickoff was yesterday for our district, and relationship is the biggest thing that we can do in order to help our students graduate. Increase the graduation rate is that relationship piece. If our class sizes, no matter what level they are so large that I cannot have a relationship, if the middle school teachers, because they have so many students, cannot have a relationship with their students, that graduation number goes down. So I kind of want you to think about how many of us have Facebook friends? How many of them do you really talk to? Then how many are you seeing on a daily basis where you are involved in their life? Classrooms are no different. I have X amount of students. This is how much time that one person in my classroom can give to X amount of students. And I'm pretty passionate about my kids. So think about that when you're...
And then really briefly, it upsets me tremendously when all of a sudden you go through and you read in the newspaper, oh, the schools are failing. The schools are not failing. The kids are not failing. And the message you're sending those kids is that you're failing and the kids are not. But sometimes you need that one adult to go through and say, it's going to be okay. Sometimes you have to have that one adult like I did, where the kid was supposed to be at the Clackamas County Jail at 5 o'clock. He missed the bus to Oregon City, and so I drove him to jail. Those are the sort of caring kind of things you do, but kids are not failing. Parents and teachers and everybody need to work together. What it is don't go through and say, oh, you have to get through in 4 years. Let's look at a 6-year. Just as long as the kids get out of school and the kids have a GED or a graduation, or they have some sort of something. But don't go through and tell the kids are failing, because they're not.
I think what Josh touched on it too, is he said it's not it's not people that fail people, it's the system that fails. So it's making sure that we look at the system and we look at, you know, how we fund education. Are we addressing class size?
If
Before
she
we-
could have time to work
Yeah.
with those 36
Before we
kids.
take other questions, we had a question that we need to get back to that we kind of didn't answer before. But I do want to also make the point that it's interesting to me that when we talk about school funding, school budgets, everybody thinks about teacher salaries. And there's so much more. There's so much more that we need to talk about. I mean, the lights, the cooks in the kitchen, the janitors. I mean, it really is an industry that we need to think about, not just teacher salaries. So all the support systems that need to be in place, because it is a system. But I did want to make sure that we did address your question.
No, I just want to know, is there any way we can maintain the pay compared to Hillsborough to be within school or Multnomah County? Because it seems like Hillsborough lose a lot of teachers, right? I mean, I don't mind paying the taxes, but as long as we maintain the teachers in 4 years high school.
Well, and they may not want to see this, what it is from a collective bargaining standpoint and going through and looking at salaries, and I did this for 25
Right.
years. We actually, when we go into bargaining, we compare alike
Okay.
sort of things. And for example, when we all merge, the Groner teachers are making $10,000 a year less than the teachers at Hill High. And so we made sure to do that. But when you go into bargaining, you go through and say, look, Beaverton's getting paid this, and so-and-so's getting paid this, and there's such a teacher shortage, we need to be competitive. And so from a collective bargaining standpoint, that's where you go through and do it, and then the show
Yeah.
begins.
And I can say that Hillsborough being, because this is a school board related, because this is a local
Right.
control issue. Hillsborough's the fourth largest district. It is, since 2008, we've cut $70 million from our budget. And so when you're looking at that and you're combining it with all these, you know, issues, we do try to do, because you want to make the least impact directly into that classroom, but then you look at, you know, as salaries as being your number one, and it's not just, there's the salaries part of it. So it's the biggest impact on your district. So it's usually class size, which is teacher ratio, and then it is also your, it's days.
Yeah, because I never seen the teacher turnover last year,
Right.
like 3 or 4 teachers
Yeah.
leaving Hillsborough
Yeah.
or somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well, and part of it's salary, part of it's working conditions,
Oh,
part of it,
conditions.
kids are kids.
Right,
You know, kids are
okay.
kids. And so you look at that, but they have a lot of debt to pay, the younger teachers on college, and so they now have to look at who's being paid a little more, so.
So again, it's a
But it's
pretty
a local issue.
complex and systemic kind of issue that we need to address. Don't we also need to just pass a bond for crying out loud?
Well, bonds don't buy teachers.
No.
Bonds buy buildings.
Other stuff, yeah. Well, again, I think we're pretty close. I can't see the clock, so I don't know what time it is. 4 minutes?
Yeah, 4 minutes, and they,
And they will-
so, we
we
have
got
to
a
be out of the
minute.
room, so, yeah, 3 minutes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you
and,
so much for being here.
hang in
Really
there.
appreciate it.